For years, Routine has been one of those games that felt almost mythical. It would appear briefly, disappear for long stretches of time, and then resurface with new footage that immediately reignited interest. Because of that long development cycle, expectations have quietly grown, and what's fascinating is how consistent the critical and preview impressions have been whenever the game has been shown. When reviewers and journalists talk about Routine, they don't frame it as just another indie horror game. Instead, they tend to describe it as an experience built almost entirely around atmosphere, tension, and a deliberate sense of unease that never lets up. One of the first things reviews consistently highlight is Routine's setting and visual identity. The game takes place on an abandoned lunar base, and critics often emphasize how convincingly isolated it feels. The retro futuristic aesthetic inspired by classic 70s and 80s science fiction gives the environment a grounded industrial look rather than something sleek or futuristic. Reviewers note that the lighting is intentionally harsh and limited, forcing players to rely on shadows, flickering lights, and environmental cues rather than clear visibility. This design choice doesn't just look good, it actively reinforces the horror because you rarely feel fully aware of what's around you. According to impressions, the environment itself feels hostile even when no enemies are present, which makes simple exploration nerve wracking. When it comes to horror design, reviews are very clear that Routine is not chasing cheap scares. Critics repeatedly describe the game as a slow burn psychological horror experience rather than a jump scare driven one. The fear comes from anticipation, uncertainty, and the feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. Several previews mention that the game excels at making players uncomfortable simply by letting silence linger. Long stretches without music, broken only by distant mechanical sounds or the hum of the station, create a constant sense of dread. Reviewers often say that Routine understands that fear is more effective when it's implied rather than shown, and that philosophy seems to guide nearly every design decision. Enemy encounters are another major talking point in reviews, particularly the robotic threats that roam the lunar base. Critics note that these enemies don't behave like traditional video game opponents. Instead of encouraging combat, their presence pushes players towards avoidance, stealth, and careful observation. Reviewers frequently describe moments where standing still, listening, or hiding felt more important than taking action. The AI is often praised for being unpredictable enough to keep encounters tense without feeling unfair. Many impressions emphasize that the game rarely makes you feel powerful and that vulnerability is a key part of its horror. Even when weapons are available, reviews suggest they feel unreliable and limited, reinforcing the idea that confrontation is a last resort rather than the primary solution. Gameplay pacing is an area where reviews are thoughtful and nuanced. Critics generally agree that Routine is intentionally slow and methodical, and that this pacing won't appeal to everyone. Reviewers who enjoy classic survival horror tend to praise this approach, saying it allows tension to build naturally and makes every decision feel meaningful. On the other hand, some previews acknowledge that players expecting constant action or frequent scares may struggle with a deliberate tempo. Still, even critical impressions usually frame this as a design choice rather than a flaw. The consensus seems to be that Routine knows exactly what kind of experience it wants to deliver and refuses to compromise that vision to appeal to a broader audience. Sound design is often singled out as one of the game's strongest elements. Across multiple reviews and previews, sound is described as essential to both immersion and survival. Distant footsteps, mechanical whirring, alarms, and environmental noise all play a role in communicating danger. Critics frequently recommend playing with headphones, noting that audio cues often provide more information than visuals. In some impressions, sound is described as the primary source of fear, with silence being just as unsettling as loud sudden noises. Reviewers suggest that Routine uses audio not just to scare the player, but to constantly keep them on edge, unsure of what's real and what's just part of the environment. When critics step back and look at Routine as a whole, the overall impression is remarkably consistent. Reviews describe it as focused, uncompromising horror experience designed for players who appreciate tension, atmosphere, and restraint. It's often compared to games like Alien Isolation or classic survival horror titles, not because it copies them, but because it shares the same philosophy of making the player feel small and vulnerable. Reviewers frequently stress that Routine isn't trying to reinvent horror, but instead aims to refine and perfect a specific style that values mood over spectacle. In the end, what reviews seem to agree on most is that routine stands out precisely because it refuses to rush or over explain itself. It trusts the players to absorb the environment, interpret subtle cues, and sit with discomfort. That approach won't be for everyone, but for fans of atmospheric horror, the critical response suggests this could be something special. It's a game built on patience, tension, and the kind of fear that lingers long after you stop playing. If you enjoyed this breakdown of what the reviews are saying about routine, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any future uploads. And if you want to support the channel even more, check out my Patreon. Right now, my latest exclusive for patrons at just $1 a month is a video on 5 underrated retro games that still hold up today. Your support helps keep the channel going and unlock even more exclusive content. Until next time, game on.